Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Sarah and this is my granny era. I feel like it has been forever since I have visited with you guys. It's probably been, I don't know, it's probably been a couple of weeks. It's just been super busy around here. So we are preparing for our second oldest son's wedding coming up next week. Oh, my prisms. Okay, see, I've got like a little light there. It's not a UFO. Oh, it is prisms. So I put some prisms in my window. A friend of mine sent me a couple really pretty light catcher colorful things, and then I had a couple of prisms that I bought years ago to hang in my window, and I just finally got them done here in my library. So that is why I have these little things on my face. I'll try to stay out of the frame. Anyway, so we are preparing for my second oldest son's wedding coming up next week. This is Wednesday the 16th. He's getting married on Thursday the 24th. So just about a week away. And that is super exciting. We love the girl that he is marrying. They have so many happy, fun plans. She is a worship leader at a church in Nebraska. And our son right now has his own construction business. And so I think he's going into construction in Nebraska with some people that he knows up there. So anyway, they just have a lot of fun plans and we are super happy, super excited for them. So we've been doing that. On top of that, my oldest son and his wife are getting ready to have a baby any day now. I think she is due like May 8th, around there that week. So we are planning a baby shower for the Sunday after the wedding because we will still have family in town. And so we've got that in the works, and I'm actually really not doing a whole lot for that, except, you know, but just it's on my mind, so it feels like I have things to do there. And then the baby, right, just coming any day now. That's exciting. And I don't know, I feel like I have just been running around. Both of my oldest daughters are working now, and so, but they don't have cars yet, and so I've been running back and forth because they both work in a different town than we live in. I have put so many miles on our van that my husband actually went out yesterday and bought me a brand new car. I will show you here pictures of my new car. It is a Subaru Ascent 2025. It's kind of like a bronzy green kind of color. I really love it. And so it is making that drive a lot nicer. We traded down actually from our 2020 Ford Transit, and this is the smallest car we have had in 18 years. So before going to the big old church van so that all 11 of us could get around together, we had a Suburban, still bigger than this new car that Jamie just got me. So yeah, 18 years since we have driven anything this small. So I am feeling like I'm driving a sports car, right? I have just been whipping around those corners and loving being able to park easy and, you know, just driving the big old huge long vans for so many years. Driving this 8-seater feels like a sports car. So anyway, been super busy and I've been reading. I just haven't sat down to make videos. So I'm back on the ball after this week. Should calm down a lot. I've been getting everybody's wedding clothes together and I'll be doing some alterations on a couple of the dresses. And not all of my kids are in the wedding, but a few of them are. So anyway, it's fun times, but it's busy times. So while this is a mid-month wrap-up, I actually did make a video right at the beginning of April to talk about a couple of these books that I read so far. I was kind of tagging on like the end of March and the beginning of April in a weekly wrap-up, and then I just didn't get to the weekly, you know, last week. So I figured I'd do a mid-month since we are on April 16th. It's perfect. But I did talk about the Vinland sagas as well as the first 80 pages of the Bone Chests. I did finish the Bone Chests. I loved it. It's probably my favorite read of 2025 so far. I have talked about this a few different times, so I won't go into detail, but if you've not heard me talk about the Bone Chest yet, go to my Historathon Quarter 2 Pile of Possibilities video, and in the close to the beginning of that video, I think it's the first book I talk about. I go into all the details about why this book is important and why why Winchester Cathedral's mortuary chests and old bones and all that, why it's important and why I was excited about reading this book. But to pick up where I left off in the last video, I have finished it, and there was just so much interesting information just about England and just the history of the kings and the church and so much stuff. One of the things I really enjoyed learning about was the way that forensic scientists use bones and teeth to discover a lot about the, skeletons that they are studying. Teeth and tissue tell a whole story about at least like the first 30 years of your life, but even when like a big change happened in your life and maybe you moved to a new climate or a new part of the world, because it holds and it's really sciencey stuff that has to do with like isotope values and things that I'm going to have a really hard time sort of explaining back to you. But it's just interesting. It talked about like how oxygen isotope values in wine reflect the area that they grew the grapes in. If you drink mostly beer rather than water, like your isotope values are different in your tissues. It's just amazing. Like there was just so much about that in here. And like I said, I don't understand it well enough to sort of like give it back to you, but just trust me. Look it up. Isotope values in human tissues and teeth. It's an interesting study for sure. At one point it talked about how this certain, I think it was a tribe. Yeah. Early medieval Europeans, there was these certain Nordic tribes that would cut grooves into their front teeth. So when an archaeologist finds teeth with these grooves in them, it helps them to know that this person came from this certain part of the world, right? Because of what this tribe does there. And so it was just using that as an example of the many different things that they can even just tell from bones about where someone lived and what they did because of common practices, like I know that there are tribes, that we used to read about in National Geographic or whatever that would like tie a board to a kid's head or something to make their forehead slanted and, the foot binding, like all that kind of stuff is going to show up in archaeology. And I just think that's so crazy and just so cool. So just in addition to the actual history of the cathedral and the goings on within the cathedral, I just learned so much about archaeology and forensic science. And here at the end, the author, she is standing in the cathedral. She describes where she's standing. I've stood there many times. She's looking up and she's looking at the mortuary chests that are up high on these little ledge. It kind of has like an arch and then it's on a ledge. And she is thinking about all of the people throughout history who have been associated with writing down the history of the cathedral and especially these particular bone chests. And she says, as I look up at the chests, I am reminded that I am yet another link in a chain, writing and rewriting this history, this nesting doll of version upon version of events that have a core of truth somewhere. And she just talks about how, her writing down of the history that she has experienced, it just adds to these many, many centuries of history. And I was like, what? Like, I'm doing the same thing. Like any notes that I have taken while I'm there, writing in my diary about that time, making videos like this, I am continuing also to document the history of this place and all the other places that I read about in my nonfiction reading adventures. And I'm just, it's a cool thing to think about, right? So that was a bone chest. Really happy I read that. But it even inspired some really big things in my life that I will talk to you guys about later. But it was a good read. I would highly recommend it. And it's one of those things, like if you're not following, just read it and then reread it, right? Or like use it as a jumping off spot for further study if it's something that interests you. All right, and then after that, I decided to reread Sundancing by Jeffrey Morehouse. Now, I had talked about this in, I think it was the same video, the Historathon Quarter 2 Pile of Possibilities, and I said, I read this for school, and I'm going to put it on the list, but I don't know if I'll get to it because I've already read it and blah, 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 right? Well, I think it was Melinda from A Web of Stories who said, hey, though, have you read Haven by Emma Donoghue? It's a fictional story set in that same place and tells a similar story from a fictional point of view, right? And I was like, no, I have not read that. I'd never even heard of it. Well, look what I went and got that exact same afternoon. So thank you, Melinda. I went out and grabbed this, and it was the only copy at my Barnes & Noble. I was like, I like Emma Donoghue. I read her book. I can't remember what it's called, but it is about fasting girls. And for a little while there, I was on this kick of like reading about Victorian fasting people. And so I read her book on that, and it was a fictional story and really well done. I really enjoyed it. So anyway, I went and got Haven. I've not yet read it, but I am planning to. And so I wanted to read Sundancing again because I want to read, like, you know, the nonfiction and the fiction. Now, the cool thing about this book is it actually is both a nonfiction and a fiction. Now, when I read this book back in college, which again was around that same time period of the Vikings, and I took 2 classes at the same time. I took a Viking class and a medieval Christianity class. So they went hand in hand. They were by the same instructor. He had the same interests. So, you know, he taught these 2 classes. So I guess I should probably tell you what the book is about. So it is about these, see these little rocky thingies here? Okay, this is called Skellig Michael. The big one is called Skellig Michael. Well, I think the whole thing's called Skellig Michael, but there's big Skellig and there's little Skellig. So they're like islands, but they're really rocky, pointy, you would think uninhabitable. But in, you know, what, the 6th century, they formed a monk colony out there, and from that point until like the 1200s, there were communities of monks living on this little Skellig Island rocky thing, and it was very primitive and very difficult. And so this just tells the history of that. Well, the first part of this book is the fictional account that goes from the first, you know, time that they think that it was inhabited through the end of when they think it was done being inhabited, right, by these monks. And so there's just little fictional stories, chapters that just kind of go from era to era and tell what they know about these times in a fictional way. Okay. And then the second half of the book is all of the evidence and explains to you in nonfiction what is the backstory, what is the historical backstory for the fictional part at the front. Okay, does that make sense? So when I was in college, I had only read the fictional story. I didn't read the rest of it and read all of the evidence. So I loved it and thought it was a great book. Well, then I went back in 2020 and I read the whole thing. I read the whole fiction story. Then I read all the nonfiction, and I wasn't as impressed. I was kind of disappointed because I was like, by the time I got to the evidence part, I had forgotten about some of the stuff that had happened at the beginning. It didn't seem relevant. Like, it just wasn't matching up. It just seemed like a lot of information, and I was just confused. So this time I got smart and I read a chapter of the fiction story. Each chapter is a different era. So I read a chapter of the fiction story, and then I went to the back and read all of the evidence and all of the backstory for that particular chapter. Then I went back and read the next chapter of the fiction story and did the same thing. Went back and read the evidence. So I went back and forth. So I stayed within the era for everything this book had to offer about that era before moving on to the next one. And that was a fantastic way to read this. And when you go onto Goodreads, you'll see that a lot of other people have figured that out as well. And it was a great, when you read it that way, it is such a fantastic book. And so I learned so much, and it was just so interesting. And the thing about the primitive harshness of these monks living on these rocky islands wasn't about the hardest part of it wasn't their living conditions. from my perspective, the hardest part about it was keeping the right heart about it, trying to model the character of Christ in the way that they thought that he wanted them to, with all of the other, personalities, just like any of us would have a struggle, right? If we were put on an island with, 11 or 12 other people and we couldn't get off and we had to basically help each other survive or die. And, it's just, there was so much that they didn't have and so many things that they were leaving behind, sacrificing and struggles. And then to try to keep a right character, yeah, anybody would have a trouble with that. So that was really the hard part. And what made it harder was there was so many rules that are just not biblical, right? There was just so many pressures and things, punishments and things that were put on the men by, the head monk or whatever he's called, that were not biblical, and guilt that was not appropriate, and things that were called sin that are not sin, right? And so these people were dealing with that on top of just so much guilt and shame for things that the Father has no problem with, right? It probably doesn't care either way on a lot of that stuff. Now, without going into too much detail, I just want to say that I have some history with groups of Christians who live a little bit more isolated than mainstream Christianity would, try to live a little bit more set apart lives and do things kind of as a community that sort of keeps them away from like the majority of other Christians. And I'm not a part of that anymore, but what I have learned from that is that I don't want to be isolated from society. And so reading this just really it just really drove home some stuff to me. And I was able to see it from a perspective that I wouldn't have been able to, right, 5 years ago. Some of the stuff in this book, in fact, a lot of it, was really cult-like mentalities, because of the monks being isolated from other influences, even ungodly influences, and being basically told what God wanted and what God said, being told that by another person who wanted to interpret for them, right? And when we do stuff like that, like, we can't help but fall into cult-like thinking and mentalities, right? Even with the best of intentions, we need influences around us, good and bad. Once we are spiritually stable, we need other points of view. We need opposing voices. We need other perspectives to help further our spiritual growth. I mean, one of the best things you can do to know why you believe what you believe is to explain it to somebody else who wants to tell you why you shouldn't believe that, right? To have to engage in apologetics is a fantastic way of understanding your own faith and understanding, where your lines of thinking are lacking. So while I'm thankful for that short time that we had to sort of solidify some things that the Father wanted to show us in our own lives, the isolation and refusal to engage with others who didn't believe like we believed, I was not having that for very long. Don't want to live like that. So, when people talk about, I just wish that I could just go live in a monastery and live like a monk forever, live like a nun forever. It would be so peaceful to just live that way and commune with the Father and not have to worry about the outside world. No. That's where the cults begin. That's where the culty mentalities do have the opportunity to flourish. Am I calling every nunnery and monastery a cult? Of course not. But those behaviors and mentalities definitely can crop up and thrive in a place where there is no opposing voices, right? Nothing else to balance it out. That's what I saw out of the story. The harsh things, the things that people think they need to do to please God. It was super sad. And this is kind of like a funny, weird parallel, but in one chapter, it talked about how when the Irish monks would travel, They wore sandals. They were provided with a staff that had a crook at the top, like a shepherd's staff, you know, who you'd imagine. And it says that they would exchange these sticks if they came across another traveling Irish monk, as a sign of brotherhood. And it made me think about my daughters who are getting ready to go to a Renaissance fair in a couple of weeks, because they are making gifts to exchange with the people that they encounter at the Renaissance fair. One of my daughters is going as a fairy from Tinkerbell, and so she is bringing little vials of blue glitter for her pixie dust to exchange with people. And then another one of my daughters has made herself a mushroom costume. She's going as a mushroom, and so she is handing out little tiny plastic mushrooms to people. So anyway, you know, if you happen to meet one of my daughters on the road, make sure that you have a pocket full of something that you can exchange with them as a sign of brotherhood. And yeah, I did change angles because the sun is going down and it was getting really dark. I don't know, I didn't particularly like it though, so we'll just kind of keep moving things around. Okay, next up was, this is what I'm reading now, okay? So now I am reading And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. I am taking a while to get through this, which shouldn't be the case, but this is the first Agatha Christie that I have read that I haven't watched the TV show for. So I've been telling you guys that when I read these, I like to read all the ones that I've watched, you know, on TV, but I haven't watched the TV one for And Then There Were None, and I am finding it hard to follow the characters. So there are like 10-ish characters in this story, and it has taken me a while to sort of get them all in my head. And even then I'm just kind of like, ooh, I don't feel like I know these characters. But when I think about some of the other Agatha Christie stories that I've read, they have a lot of characters in them too, and I don't have a struggle keeping track of them, right? Because I can see them in my imagination. And so, because I've seen the show, right? And so, with this one, I'm having a hard time following it. So, anyway, I'm almost done with it. I think also I kind of am not really into it right now. What I really want to be reading is Pride and Prejudice. And I know I said in my pile of possibilities video for April that I wasn't going to read Pride and Prejudice, even though Anne is reading it on her Jane Austen birthday challenge for this month. The group read book is Pride and Prejudice, and so everybody's reading it. And I said, oh, I'm not going to read it because I've read it so many times. Well, what happened was my 16-year-old daughter, Avalon, who is the one that likes to read all the books after I read them. We were into the cat books, right? Okay, well, she came up the other day and she's like, Mom, I really want to read Jane Austen. What should I start with? And so I told her, you know, the big three that are my favorites, which is Pride and Prejudice and Sense and Sensibility and Northanger Abbey. And I said, you know, those are my favorites. But maybe you should start with Pride and Prejudice since that's a story that you know. Then you can get a feel for Jane's, you know, writing and her language and things and humor and all this stuff. And then you'll understand the others a little better. So she took my copy of Pride and Prejudice, and as soon as she did, I was like, I kind of want to read that now. And the more I was like talking to her about it, she's, Mom, you know, which sisters do you think we are? Because I have 5 daughters, just like Mrs. Bennet does. And so I was picking out, you know, who everybody was. And the more I talked about it, the more I wanted to read it. And I'm like, she has my copy. But then I remembered, I actually have this. I got from one of my friends, and it is a copy of Pride and Prejudice. It is the complete novel, but it has in it these letters. So it has these little pockets here, and inside is a letter. I don't want to lose my place. Inside is a letter, handwritten, hand-folded. Actually, there's 2 of them in this one, and not even open yet. They're folded. Oh, they're folded, you know, Jane style. And it's a letter from the book, I guess, that they have written out. And so as you get to that spot, you read the letter. They are marked. So like this one, Mrs. M. Gardiner, Grace Church Street, London, from Meryton. It has a Meryton postmark on it. And then the other one, Miss Elizabeth Bennet, Longbourn, near Meryton, Hertfordshire, with a postmark. So, helps you figure out what you're supposed to read. So I'm thinking about maybe reading this. The pages are really thin, like onion skin, almost, not quite as thin as a Bible, but really close. But my friend bought me this for my birthday like a couple of years ago, and I haven't read it yet. And then my husband found Persuasion in the same form a year ago, maybe. We were at Barnes & Noble and bought that for me too, and I haven't read it yet either. So I might actually finish up this Agatha Christie tonight and move on to my Pride and Prejudice with the letters in it and enjoy that just for a change, right? Because that was the whole reason I didn't want to read Pride and Prejudice. I've read it a billion times. I love it. It's a great story. I'm going to read it a billion times more. It's just that I have all these other things I wanted to read, and so I wasn't really that into it. I just read it like last year or the year before, but now that Avalon's reading it, like, this is what it looks like. And I'm just over here like, you're reading my book? And I'm not. So I might read this one. All right, but that's where I'm at, and that's what's going on in my life. And I have a bunch of tag videos still that I need to make. I'm really behind on my tags, but I love to be tagged. So I have all these tag videos from the people who are so sweet to tag me, and they know that I like to be tagged. So anyway, I got to get those tag videos done up. I'm going to plan on getting quite a few done this week and get them all scheduled in, especially you might have like a week of tags from me, because I might schedule them to come on when my mom is here and we're doing wedding stuff and baby stuff and everything is, busy. But anyway, hope everybody's doing good. It was fun to come on and chat with you guys. I will see you soon. Bye-bye.